Welcome to the Leading at the Next Level podcast with Dove Development and Consulting, the show built to provide ongoing support for your leadership journey. So before we move into today's lesson, let's make sure we're on the same page. We've seen firsthand how much more is required to provide authentic leadership to a team than to simply manage based on the authority that comes with a title or position. What we've learned through more than 50 combined years of leadership responsibility is that taking the extra steps to serve people and really earn influence will always produce results that barking orders just never will. Now, if you'll stick with us to the end of the episode, we're going to share how you can get a complimentary trial to a resource that we've built that's like nothing else you've ever seen. Now, with that in mind, let's get to work. This episode picks up on one of the profitability killers, and it really takes a look at the cost of an unaccountable workforce. Leaders, here's the deal. I'm counting on you to have done the work to address the last two profitability killers we looked at. The cost of confusion was one, and really also putting in place the steps that you need to set clear expectations for your teams. And gosh, even with the most detailed explanation, though, there's a high likelihood that we're not going to see our team members necessarily meet and exceed those expectations, at least not over the long haul, if we don't have a culture of accountability. Now, with that in mind, this next profitability killer that we need to work through and really address is going to dig into the costs our businesses are really going to have to eat when nobody's held accountable. And no one might be a pretty broad term. Accountability, quite honestly, I feel like it covers a wide range. We hold ourselves accountable to, say, a certain standard, and we're all accountable to the rule of law within society that we're a part of, and there's inevitably some level of accountability for performance in our organizations where we make our living. Now, for our purposes here, I'm going to skip the personal accountability. If you've hung with me through each of these profitability killers that we've looked at so far, I really expect that you've got that pretty well in hand. And as much as I'd like to jump on the soapbox here and really stress the importance of accountability for our actions in society, and even how the lack thereof is really a direct contributor to what I think is some decay that we're experiencing in that rule of law, that's a fight for another day. I don't know that you or I together, just the two of us, can do that. But as a whole, I think we can over time. But what we are going to do is we're going to dig in. We're going to use both hands, and we're going to dig into how we can recognize when more accountability is needed within the teams we lead, what it costs us when we haven't maintained accountability, and we're going to look at steps that we can take to ensure accountability is a vital part of our culture. First, though, let's make sure that we're singing from the same sheet of music with regards to why it even matters in what we do. Now, in an article, I found it from quite honestly, the predictive index. That was my source. I kind of forgot that for a second. It was called Holding People Accountable Where Most Leaders Fail. It was by a person named Shannon Howard. And Shannon, I don't know if that was a guy or a girl because it could be either, right? The reference, the CEO benchmarking report done by that predictive index organization. And here's what Shannon said in that. Said, holding people accountable is difficult, even for leaders who head up companies. 18% of the CEOs we surveyed cited holding people accountable as their biggest weakness. Additionally, 15% struggle with letting go of underperformers. Now, if we consider either of those groups by themselves, I really believe that we could maybe easily brush over them as not being that big a deal. But if we add the two together for 1/3 of all the CEOs that group surveyed, and we keep in mind that these CEOs should indeed be the most developed leaders in their respective organizations, isn't it likely that there's an even higher percentage of the folks in other supervisory or management roles within their companies who struggle even more than they do in holding their teams accountable? Now, since that's kind of a rhetorical question, let's just kind of push through with why this is really a problem. Now, in that same article, Howard went on to share this as to how the issue impacts a business. Shannon said, when accountability is lacking, performance, company culture, and morale suffer. When employees are not held accountable for missed deadlines, bad behavior, or poor performance, a leader's credibility is damaged, and loyalty from their team wavers. This ultimately impacts the leader's ability to inspire high-performing, winning teams. One of the most common things that I've heard, say, a supervisor or a manager share with me once they finally had all they could stand and decided to address some unacceptable behavior has been something along the lines of, gosh, you've done this for the very last time, and I'm not going to stand for it anymore. Now, while it's indeed a supervisor's or a manager's responsibility to address poor behavior, the most common response that I often hear the employee in those situations sounds kind of like, well, gosh, if what I've been doing so wrong, then why didn't you say anything to me before now? I thought you didn't mind me doing it this way. Now, let's be honest here. Most of us have heard a dialogue that's something like that between parents and their children just as often as we've heard it in the workforce. And the results aren't all that different in either place, right? When there's no consistency in that accountability. And all those times, as parents or as leaders, when we choose to look the other way, when our expectations aren't being met, we've in fact endorsed that behavior as being acceptable. Now, this damages our credibility, and it's going to be a source of frustration to anybody around who is holding themselves accountable to that higher standard, right? But it comes with a price tag. So I don't think we can gloss over that. So I really believe we need to detail some of those costs that our organization will face when we don't maintain that high level of accountability throughout the workforce. Forgive me there just a little bit. I jumped on a cough. I had a cough drop before we started, and I was about to choke and die on it, but now we're going to be okay. So let's consider again what Shannon Howard shared from that. I'm going to read it once more so you can really internalize that quote. He said, when accountability is lacking, performance, company culture, and morale suffers. When employees are not held accountable for missed deadlines, bad behavior, or poor performance, a leader's credibility is damaged and loyalty from their team wavers. This ultimately impacts the leader's ability to inspire high-performing, winning teams. So to get a really solid handle on the profitability that's killed when nobody's held accountable, we need to have an extremely clear understanding of just how many areas of our business is going to be impacted by it. Now, once we've come to term with how far that reach really can be, I think we have far less difficulty in developing and maintaining accountability that's necessary to produce great results. One of the things, though, one of the most common reasons that I've heard for not holding a team member accountable has really shown up in the form of, I'm going to say, making an excuse for that poor performance or the bad behavior. Now, don't get me wrong. I know it's never meant to be an excuse, but that's really what it is. And it usually sounds something along the lines of, yeah, I know they're dealing with some things in their personal life right now, so I'll just wait till that's smoothed out to see if it's still an issue. Or maybe the manager supervisor says, hey, they've always done such a good job for so long. I hate to jump on them this one time. Now, my guess is that you can relate as maybe an employee watching one of those play out, maybe as a manager who said at least something similar, or possibly as both, right? Here's where I want to challenge you, though. I want you to put your employee hat on for a minute. If you're part of the team and you're working just as hard as you possibly can and you're focused on exceeding expectations like we talked about before, I want to ask you, how does this set with you when you see the manager walk by one of your coworkers who's clearly not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and that manager doesn't even address it? Now, since you're working through this process with me, I've got to believe that you're probably going to be a bit frustrated, just like I would be. But make no mistake, our manager's choice not to address that situation, when they see it, it sends a very different message, a completely different message to many of our coworkers, one that actually approves of that bad behavior or that poor performance. Now, at a minimum, the bar for the type of performance that's going to be accepted just got a little bit lower. Unfortunately, though, that manager's influence to lead the team, that just slipped as well. And here's one more question I want you to really consider before we move on. How much discretionary effort are you willing to give a manager that you just watched walk by somebody who's clearly not even meeting expectations? I can't imagine it's going to be anywhere close to that 57% additional discretionary effort that we looked at before. That the Harvard Business Review article I've referenced several times through this process says leads to 20% improvement on individual productivity. I just can't. Now, Howard, back in that same article from Predictive Index, also mentioned how the team's loyalty to that leader, it drops, right? Now, I often in these lessons and in different sessions that Cindy and I do, I've mentioned my friend Terry Ward a number of times. Um, and and I want to be as clear as I possibly can be. He's certainly been a wonderful mentor over the last 25 years. I appreciate him dearly, but he's also been that guy that's been very, very willing to call me out when I've done something stupid. And trust me, I've given him more than a few opportunities for that. And he doesn't even need me to give opportunities. He can find them pretty well, but I do okay at making it easy for him. Now, while he and I, at this point, we only talk on the phone a few times each year, and we see each other in person even less. Um, Excuse me just a second. I'm going to say there's not many people on the planet that I'm willing to be more accountable or more loyal to, right? And by always having those high expectations for me and hold me accountable to meet those expectations, quite frankly, I think he's earned that loyalty that I've got for him. Now, I want you to think about it from the other side. I referenced Terry and the high expectations he set, the accountability, and how loyal that's made me to him over time. I want to ask you, how loyal are you to somebody who's not holding the team members around you accountable? And what if they've allowed you to do as you please? Now, I don't expect either of those earn a whole lot of loyalty, right? And if we miss out as leaders, if we miss out on just 10% of that improved productivity from that additional discretionary effort that I've referenced over and over and over, because I think it's that important, um, when we're not holding our teams accountable, especially from the folks that are the most engaged on our teams, the ones that are really driving the ship forward for us, so to speak, that can be a huge loss in profit on an annual basis. And we've, through the series, we've extrapolated that and we've talked a lot about that. Now, with less loyalty, I'm going to ask, can we really expect our best performers to stick around either? Now, I'm not sure that I would stay in a role where I'm working as hard as I can, and I'm going to assume that you're not going to either, especially when we're watching other folks get away with it, when there's not that accountability. And guess what? We're going to work as hard as we can anyway. But if we're seeing other people not work hard, not be accountable, we're probably not going to stick around, right? So turnover, that's one of those things that can be extremely expensive. And I often reference the studies that show it's anywhere from 50% of an annual salary to 5 times that annual salary to replace somebody. If we're specifically looking at those top performers, I'm going to go so far as to say it's likely going to cost us closer to that 5 times their salary to replace them than it is half their salary. And here's the thing, that's going to quickly reach hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in any organization, right? Because those are our top performers. And again, multiply their salary times 5. And my guess is those are big bucks in even the smallest of companies. Now, with all that in mind, you'd think that not holding a team accountable would be really uncommon. It's not. But before we can address the issue, we need to understand why it happens so often, I think. So, in seeing how much profitability we can miss out on when we lose credibility and our teams become less loyal, and those certainly aren't the only issues that we're going to see if we aren't holding team members accountable. One might quickly ask why a leader would even consider allowing that kind of stuff to go on. Now, I believe the answer is really simple, and I also think it ties back to that old adage about we often don't see the forest for the trees. Sometimes we just don't know what we don't know, right? Now, I've emphasized it repeatedly as we've looked at each of these profitability killers leading up to this point. I've never seen somebody with significant amount of leadership responsibility who's got an abundance of free time. To that end, I'm not sure I've ever seen a leader with any free time. One thing that makes a leader effective is how they use their time, and that time is rarely used looking for things to do. The things to do tend to find the leader as opposed to the leader having to find the things to do. And a heavy load of responsibilities to juggle can be those trees that keep us from seeing the forest, so to speak. Now, I can't point to a single time where I've heard a leader say, I just don't think it matters if I don't hold my team accountable. Credibility, loyalty, those things aren't important anyway. No leader says that, right? But I have seen countless situations where supervisors or managers, they've had all these different fires burning their backsides, and they've had to choose which one gets their immediate attention. And in many cases, an employee's behavior, it's not completely terrible. The performance is only a little bit below what's expected. Gosh, so the manager focuses their attention on something that's more urgent in that moment. Now, as a quick side, I'll stress that I remember getting some advice a long time ago that suggested that I better be very, very cautious about allowing the urgent to take priority over the important. Now, that's a whole different topic, but I'll leave that with you to really ponder right here. Now, since the behavior that we're looking at, it might have just slipped a little bit below acceptable, or maybe it's not completely out of line, but it's toeing the line. It's not completely unacceptable. The show goes on, right? And so does the downward spiral that typically comes with it. Now, whether it's through that particular employee perceiving it as approval, or the other people around watching it unfold and kind of taking that as permission that they can follow suit with lower behaviors or toeing the line, the conditions usually begin to drift. And unfortunately, all the busyness often keeps that manager from noticing all the little shifts until it smacks them in the face. And that's typically in the form of a monthly productivity report, or profit and loss, or something like that. And by that time, all those little behaviors or small daily misses in performance, they've compounded, and the folks involved have assumed everything was just fine. And gosh, it might have even shifted into habits at that point. Now, I can't count the number of times where supervisors or managers, they've come to me about an employee that they've wanted to fire, but they've had zero documentation that addressed any specific poor performance or miss leading up to that point. They clearly, as they've come to me, we need to fire them right now. They've reached their boiling point, but no single situation had ever been big enough to pull them away from that urgent before then. The key to changing this and really building a culture of accountability, one where we've got a solid chance of capturing that profitability that we lose when nobody's held accountable. I think it lies in recognizing where and when accountability really starts to drop off. That's where we need to start. Thanks for listening to the Leading at the Next Level podcast. Next time, we'll pick up where we left off by digging into recognizing the need for more accountability. Now, if you'd like to go deeper into anything that we've shared here, or you just need continuing education credits for your professional credential, send us an email at admin@dove-development.net, and we'd be happy to hook you up with a 45-day all-access trial to our complete Leading at the Next Level program at no cost. That full program includes well over 100 hours of digital lessons, complete with slides and action-based assessments that are really geared to help you capture measurable bottom-line improvements in your organization. It also includes live lessons each month that have Q&A, and it's really geared to help you identify the specific action steps you want to take to lead your team more effectively.